All right, everybody, welcome to this month's meeting of the Firefighter Book Club. This meeting is going to be a little different than normal. We're actually going to be discussing my book. So normally I would be on here discussing a fire service book with another author. But this month we're going to kind of turn the tables, but we are going to have some special guests on here that actually helped me with a lot of the concepts in the book, pitching stuff back and forth and bouncing it off and helping me with proofreading and ideas. But also, I was very fortunate to have some great people submit some case studies for the employee fires thing that we were doing in the book. So this is my strategies and tactics for employee fires, or very commonly known as Rescue Me book, that we're covering today. And these case studies, I originally thought that being employed by a fire department and getting it approved by my chiefs, as far as getting it printed, that they might not let me use some of the stories that I had printed or had written in there. So reached out to some people that have had some great experiences with employee problems, and were able to send something up. Just like my stories, they changed the names to protect the innocent and the guilty. So yeah, I'm really excited. I have Steve Przborowski on here, Paul Strong, both guys that I've taught with before, co-taught, and lucky enough we're able to submit case studies. So start off, Paul, how are you doing today?
Doing wonderful. I'm happy to be here, Jesse. Thank you.
It's always a pleasure to see you, man. I wish I would see you more often, but it's great to see you, and you know, up there in Washington. I don't get up there too often, but we definitely need to hang out. So appreciate you coming on here, man.
Absolutely.
And Steve P, Chief P, whatever, depending on whichever last name you don't want to pronounce, but it starts with something and then P.
Whatever works for you. I'm good. I answered anything. So how you doing, brother?
I don't know if your wife says it that way, but I know that, you know, usually if I say, hey, you usually answer, and I appreciate that.
Well, there's a reason she kept Tara 5 letters versus 12, I guess. So can't blame her.
Yeah. So
all good. How you doing?
Yeah, so I want to, I guess first off, before we get started into my book and some of the case studies that you guys submitted, this is the last meeting for the month of 2022, and throwing it out there, I pretty much got the list for 23 finalized. Throw out a couple different books that we printed on the list. So yeah, Flashpoint by Frank Viscuso. We had that lined up for October of this year. Some of you probably saw it, but I was roller skating at my son's 17th birthday party and fell against a table and cut my eye open, and we had to cancel that meeting. So we're going to reschedule Frank V to come on and do Flashpoint. Read the book.
Still going with that story, Jesse?
Yeah.
Yes,
abuse. Be a better story by now, but yeah.
Yeah, I was mugged by somebody, but the pictures are definitely worth it. So yeah, unfortunately we had to reschedule Frank. We're going to try to squeeze him in this year. And Tattoos and Trauma by David Griffin. We were supposed to do that one while we were teaching at Fire Rescue International, and just with flight delays and some other stuff in Texas, we just couldn't get it time frame wise done. Luckily I still got an episode of Firefighters and Fire Trucks Getting Ice Cream recorded while I was out there with Dave Mellon, which was a whole nother story, but didn't get the book club done. This year, we got some new books that just came out that we've added to the list. So Les Carpluck, we were originally supposed to do one of his previous leadership books on here over the last 2 years. He's in Canada, so it's a little bit more hard to kind of arrange, but he just came out with his new one, Coffee Cup Leadership. It just went on sale like a week ago. So that's kind of the other cool thing, I think, with the Firefighter Book Club. We're always kind of staying up on top of the new stuff that's coming out. Matter of fact, one of my guests, Steve P., his Courage Under Fire Leadership book, I know he's been writing it for a while, and looking forward to that one coming out sooner or later. Jason Hobelman, the new fire officer, we had him tagged on here last year, didn't get to it, so we moved him to this year. Just had a great conversation with Nick Brunacini not too long ago, and we're going to try to get him on here to do Anatomy and Physiology of Leadership, one of the books that he actually wrote with his dad, co-wrote with his dad. I would love to have him on here doing B-Shifter, but it's probably not appropriate for that. So Nick's going to come on, do A&P of Leadership. Corley Moore's new book, if you have not seen that, The 9 L's, Keys to Building a High Performance Culture. So I actually was on the scrap with Corley not too long ago. Always fun to be on there with him. Steve, have you been on the scrap with Corley?
No, not yet.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure if you were on that one. But yeah, his new book that I announced.
Corley, if you're listening, hopefully in the future. I'm available.
Now we know. Yeah, Corley, there's a shout out. So the Functional Fire Company with Scott Thompson. We also got him on here. Billy Goldfeder. I got Billy G to come on. He's going to come on with his mustache. We're going to talk about Pass It On #1, the very first one. I know that there's 3 different editions out. We figured we wanted to go old school, talk about the very first one and do the Pass It On. And Mike Galliano is going to come on, maybe, hopefully with Ann, and we'll do challenges of the firefighter marriage this year, which will work out with me because I have been overbooking myself lately and it has caused some marital problems. So maybe I'll squeeze that one in at the beginning of the year and try to fix that before we move on. And last but not least, this is number 10. We usually keep space open in the year for 2 more books, whatever comes up. But the last one is the training officer that's being actually being finished right now by Dave McGlynn. This is actually the next one that's going to come out from Firefighter Book Club Publishing and Red Helmet Training. And we've been reviewing the manuscript. It's in final. It's going to peer review right now. So I figured we were far enough along. And I'd already told Dave, I said, I threw you on the reading list for next year and your book's not even out yet. So he's like, you're crazy. So that's the reading list for 2023. I'm really excited about it. It's amazing that this is our 3rd year of doing this now. We've had some great books on here and great authors. And now we're going to talk about one that is not a great book and not a great author, but I got it written either way. So, all right. So first off, Steve, you've kind of come along this journey with me for a while. And we ended up being able to co-teach where you were doing your Courage Under Fire, leadership. I was doing this class, the Rescue Me, strategy and tactics for employee fires. And our material usually syncs up pretty well. And that's kind of the reason we've been able to teach together with that. What was some of the initial stuff as we were like pitching these ideas back and forth and comparing employee problems to personnel fires? I know we've kind of had some discussions.
Oh yeah, I mean, that's the one good thing about being an officer over the years. You know, I was a captain for about 6 years, BC for about 6 years, and then deputy chief for about 10 years. And there's definitely never a shortage of case studies to talk about, you know, and I think that's been some of the challenges, is trying to make sure that we can all draw from our experiences as well to prepare others by sharing our experiences in a positive, productive way. Without making fun of anybody, so we can hopefully, like I said, help people prepare themselves for the future challenges and the current challenges they have.
Well, and I think that when we start talking about fires on the street, a lot of times we can do after action reviews on there. We can actually discuss what went right and what went wrong. But with your employee fires, they get sealed up in an envelope or a file or a drawer, and we can't really talk about those. So as company officers and chief officers, without simulated employee problems or role playing or something like that, just like we do for the fire ground, it's very difficult to kind of tap into that. So we have to continue to figure out ways that we can train our personnel on how to deal with these employee fires, because they're going to come up much more often than the fires on the street.
Oh yeah, even the best of departments. I mean, Santa Clara County Fire, great department, great people, 300 plus people, and like any other department, there's always going to be occasional challenges, just because why? We have human beings, and every department does. And I think you mentioned Nick Bernasini and Alan Bernasini a little while ago in your opening speech here. And I remember it was either John, Nick, or Alan himself saying the simulated personnel problems or challenges were probably the best thing they ever did, because you know, years ago, Phoenix created the Command Training Center, the CTC, I think with great success, to make sure they rotate all their officers on a regular basis through simulated exercises, which is important. But then they also realized that where a lot of the officers struggled in Phoenix was the personnel issues, because, you know, the fires, the emergency incidents are a small percentage of what we do. What's the majority of what we do? People. And I remember one of the Brunasini is mentioning a story about how they had a simulated exercise with these same group of officers for the fire simulations. They did, let's do a personnel issue. And when they heard the different ways or the different strategies and tactics that some of these captains would choose to handle this issue, they realized that, wow, we're really way across the board when it comes to managing personnel issues, and then they're having some challenges. So I think you mentioned it earlier that simulated exercise is no different than fireground scenarios. We need to start doing, I think, more of that to put people in the hot seat when it's a safe environment, in a training environment, because what happens, as we know, is when the real thing hits and you, that officer, are faced with that personnel issue for the first time that you've never thought of, never prepared for, you're caught sometimes in a bad position that you can even make it worse by what you do or what you don't do based on what you say or what you just choose to not handle. So I think the whole premise for what your book was, I think, is really critical because it ties into all my Courage Under Fire leadership stuff of preparing others for the challenges that they're going to have today and tomorrow.
Yeah, and I think it's really cool. Like, you can still find some of them on YouTube or from a training officer here and there. You know, the videos that Brunacini made, you know, for the employee problems, the firefighter doing, you know, some type of patient assessment on a female and on the side of the road in a vehicle, and then he answers his phone, you know, and it's pretty amazing. Like, they were already like ahead of their time, like already understanding that the phones in the fire service are going to become a problem when it starts coming to an employee problems. You know, I remember as a firefighter, like, I was allowed to use the phone in the kitchen one time between 5 and 7 p.m. to call home. And that was it. And now we could be going racing down the street to a structure fire, and they're on there sending emails and checking Twitter and all kinds of stuff and not even paying attention to what's going on.
Well, actually, to give you a little backstory, like that cell phone where the Phoenix firefighter threw the cell phone, that was an actual incident that happened. And from what I understand, as part of the training after that incident, because they were surprised that, wait, you actually threw the phone, damaged the person's property, blah, blah. As part of the remediation, I guess the process is that they would put individuals and make them go through, you know, the training videos to help now prepare others. So those were actual incidents that apparently happened that I guess to help maybe alleviate some of the discipline, that people admitted to, like, hey, I'll be happy to share my story and to be a part of the solution so we don't have the same thing happen again.
Constructive discipline, right there.
Yes.
Right. Well, and I think that's, for me, just watching this process go through, teaching the strategy and tactics for employee fires class and the book now and everything else, I think the coolest thing that we were teaching, like a normal, call it the sandwich method if you want, like, hey, here's the value of the employee, here's the crap that you're doing wrong in the middle, and then now we want to put another piece of bread on it to wrap it up and bring value of the employee back. But I think the coolest thing that I've seen as we've started teaching, like, the rescue me side of it, not even just where it said strategy and tactics for employee fires, but naming it rescue me and teaching a philosophy of your number one greatest asset is your people. Well, we sure don't act like it sometimes. And if you take it into a firefighter mentality mindset and a command mindset, is when you go to an employee fire, it's just like the employee fire or the fires on the street. When you show up, your job is to make it better. When you actually go up there, you should be using your radio voice, not screaming over the radio, not cursing. When we don't do that on the radio, you shouldn't do it in your office. And changing it to there's a mentality of, I'm here to save them, sometimes saving them from themselves. But my job as a company officer, as a chief officer, is to save them from the fire. And some of these guys burn themselves down on the ground, and we might have to scrape them down the foundation and rebuild them or relocate them to another fire department in the future. As Chief Brunacini would always say, today, Firefighter Smith, you have outperformed the ability of the Phoenix Fire Department to help you out anymore. We will take you to the next fire department. But I think that's been the really cool change on the mentality of doing that.
Well, I think that's Nick Brunacini said it so well years ago, because he said the same thing. I remember in one of the classes of, sometimes we have to help people save them from themselves. And I think that's been one of my whole focuses of Courage Under Fire leadership, is it takes courage to be a leader in today's world, just in general, but especially in the fire service as a company officer, obviously as a chief officer, but be it going from that buddy to boss or crew member to supervisor and still trying to have a good cohesive team. Sometimes you're going to have to be that one that helps save others, even though they don't maybe take it that way. They look at you as the bad person for holding them accountable, because we all know that people want to be held accountable as long as it's not them. It's okay if it's others, and then you're the other A word when you do hold people accountable. But you're really, even though some people may look at you saying, hey, you're trying to cover your own butt. Well, not really. I'm trying to actually cover your butt and help your butt so we can keep you here and have a good cohesive team. But yeah, that's the challenging part of trying to share that message, that we're not out to get people. We're actually trying to help people.
Yeah. Well, I know, like, we've referenced Bruno a couple of times, and he had a ton of influence on this book. He unfortunately passed away prior to me getting it finalized. And there probably would have been a couple more Bruno stories in here, stuff that he did tell me prior to me printing it that I didn't get permission from him to use. But amazingly, the book was in final edit, and I sent it to all the people that have been involved in it. And interestingly enough, this was like a last minute ad. Dave Dotson sent me back some editorial comments like, hey, you should probably look at this. And a lot of it referenced the reading smoke stuff that we were using from him to apply to the employee thing. But the really cool thing is, Dave actually gave me another Bruno Cini thing when it comes to employee fires. And we were in the book, we kind of talked about, is the fire immediately dangerous to their life and health? And that's the difference between if you as a company officer are going to take IC or you're going to pass it up to a chief officer. If it's IDLH, then it's probably a larger fire and you're going to need a command structure. Well, I guess Bruno Cini one time told Dave, I think they were going back to the airport from a conference. Dave had the privilege of driving Bruno back to the airport, and truly a privilege. We all know that. You get to hang out with Bruno a little longer. And there's a conversation about employee stuff, and Bruno tells Dave, he says, well, when it comes to employee stuff, it's just like when you go out and do like a fire inspection. If it's just a normal basic cleanup, change type of thing, get them up to the fire code, then the company officer should be managing it. But if it's a life safety issue, somebody could die from this, then you take it up to the fire marshal or the chief officer or whatever. And it was cool because he was literally emailing me back this story from Bruno based on some stuff that, man, was already in the book. Bruno has that way of making difficult things so much more simple, as always. So last minute ad from Dave Dotson, well worth it. And I debated for a while squeezing it in.
Cool.
Steve, let's talk about your case study that you submitted. And the funny thing is, when I sent out the emails for everybody looking for case studies, I'm sure they were probably going through their brain thinking of all the different ones that they could do. And there's probably a ton of them that you've had the luxury of managing. But you actually picked one that, hey, I was a brand new captain, and this was like kind of one of my first ones. So if you don't mind, give a synopsis to everybody as far as what you're.
Sure. No, thank you. And that is so true. I think we all have these stories, especially those of us that are fortunate to teach and speak. We rely on these stories, not to be storytelling per se, but to be able to draw upon those experiences and share our mistakes and successes when they do happen. But I remember as a brand new captain, one of the challenges is when I was a firefighter, I didn't have that many officers provide expectations to me. But as I was preparing to become a company officer, I knew it was imperative that I actually created my own expectations because of all the classes I had, but also all the good mentors and the advice that I received from those mentors that, okay, here I am getting ready to be a new company officer and I'm creating my expectations. I remember even on the assessment center for the company officer test, they asked me about expectations and I nailed it. Okay, so here I am. I'm a brand new company officer. I'm at the double company house and I'm just having a blast. I'm on the engine company. I got a probationary firefighter assigned to me. And in our department at the time, we rotated probationary firefighters usually for like a quarter at a time. And so here I got the probationary firefighter. I get there, I'm all fired up and everything else. And I've got my expectations. And I'm also very sensitive to not forgetting where I came from, not micromanaging, really trying to be a good supervisor, leader, manager, all those things. I thought I prepared pretty well. So I came into this basically treating a probationary firefighter like a veteran firefighter, which that was sometimes it works, but this time it didn't. So my expectations to the junior firefighter, who is about as green as you can come, was basically, hey, get your gear on the rig, get your gear on the rig, check the rig out, he was a driver for the day, get everything checked out, and then we'll meet them, do our morning breakfast, do the morning meeting, and then we'll go out driving and everything else. And he's doing his thing. And my basic expectations for him were just pretty simple, just like 3 words: do your job, and I felt do your job pretty much covers almost everything, because I didn't want to micromanage. He was trained to the firefighter 1 and 2 level, so he had the basic training. And we're hauling code 3. We get toned out for an EMS call, going code 3, and we're hauling down the street. And my head's, this is before we had iPads and Panasonic Tough Books and everything else. It was old school map books. I knew my area pretty well, but I still got the map book open so I could dial myself into the exact house and basically tell them, hey, this far down the street, left side, right side, blah, blah. Well, all of a sudden we're going through, and I'm not paying attention, and the firefighter riding backwards can't see anything. And all of a sudden it was just like, we haul butt literally right through an intersection and almost get clipped. And I use the reference of, like, for any of us old enough, it was like the old Frogger video. And if you don't know what Frogger is, GTS, Google that stuff. But Frogger is basically where you play the game and the Frogger goes across the busy intersection without getting hit, well, squashed in that case of a frog. And all of a sudden it was like one of those, I look over and it was like I jokingly say a WTF moment, and WTF not where's the fire or well-trained firefighters. It was like, what the, and he's like, what's up, Cat? And I'm like, well, what just happened? It's like, well, we're going to the call basically. And we made it. We didn't kill anybody. Nobody got injured and everything else, but it was a close call. We could have, something bad could have happened. But anyway, we get to the call, and afterward it's like, dude, what was up with that? And here's a kid that was trained to the driver operator 1A, 1B level. He passed all the tests. And I remember joking with him, it's like, how much have you've never probably driven a truck, and his biggest thing he's driven was like a Honda Accord, I think it was, which not his fault, but now he's driving a fire engine. And my challenge was I gave him my expectations, because he basically called me out in a respectful, tactful way, because he's just saying, he goes, all you said was just do your job. And I go, yeah, follow the laws, follow the DMV laws, the department policies. And I should have been a little bit more specific, given his level of training or lack thereof, of, okay, I expect you to stop at stoplights and stop signs, because that wasn't our policy manual at the time. But there's no way a policy manual this thick, anyone's going to memorize it, especially when they're brand new on the job. So it was one of those things that I learned the lesson that obviously you've got to know the strengths and weaknesses of your personnel. And you got your veterans and you got your new folks, people in the middle sometimes, and you got to find that sweet spot without micromanaging them, without over explaining things, but without under explaining things either, because when something bad happens, they'll be the first to say, well, you never told me I couldn't do that. It's like, well, I can't tell you do everything, yes or no, but you should. I mean, in a perfect world, we'd say do your job, use common sense, but we all know that sometimes people have a different definition of using common sense and doing your job. So
Right.
It was one of those moments that after cleaning my shorts, it was like, okay, thank God we didn't get killed or injured, or didn't kill or injure anybody in the process. But it was one of those things that forced me to fine tune my expectations as time went by. And, to this day, I've never found the perfect way of sharing expectations, but I think it's better to at least attempt to share expectations than not. So one of many lessons learned that I could talk forever on, but I'll sum it up right there.
Yeah, well, and amazingly, as we continue to write the book and play with it, we let you guys submit case studies as long or as short as you wanted, and at the end, everybody had some white space at the end, and I tried to figure out, like, hey, how am I going to fill that white space? And plenty of pictures of me and you at conferences. I could have put a picture of me and you, but I decided to fill that white space and connect the dots between the book and then what you guys are doing out there in the teaching world and the conference world. So in the author's note for yours, I talked, if you're not familiar with Chief P, I highly suggest you look them up, but there's 2 great classes that that Chief P teaches out there that really align with the thought process of this book and why he was asked to contribute. The first class is the designated adult. I think that was before your Courage Under Fire leadership. I think that's what you kind of called it. Which looks at headlines from around the country and sometimes videos of firefighters doing things that get them in trouble. Many times these events could have and should have been stopped by the company officer, or in Steve's terms, the designated adult, right? It's easy for you to do the same thing to put together some training as a quick internet search, put in the word firefighter and some other type of variable that would not look well or go good with that first word. And the big thing to note here is just like when we sit down with the crew to review a case study of fire that did not go well, you can also do the same thing and kind of do an after action review. Question, could it happen here? Was there cultural items that led to this employee fire? Was there policies or expectations that are missing or keeping it from happening? So I think that kind of like looks at those expectations. And then the other one is like you've already discussed, the courage in the courage under fire leadership. You don't want to be the bad guy, but it takes courage to step up and deal with these things. And if you don't have that, you're going to be in for a long ride. All right. So setting those expectations and making sure that they're aligning and following those expectations, I think is critical.
Yeah, we know how important the company officer role is in the fire service too. I mean, they literally have their hands on the largest group of people that are really dictating the culture and, everything that goes on in the fire stations and the department. So they need to have the courage. They need to be supported and have that training like you're talking about, Steve, but we currently aren't really providing that, at least not to any depth.
Without a doubt, I think conflict resolution, which I don't want to say conflict in a bad way, but even just sometimes basic communication to address issues, because I think a lot more people are doing a better job at the expectations portion of it. But where I see the challenge across the country is actually the holding accountable portion, because people are maybe not trained as well as they should be in conflict resolution, communicate, or even just general communication, whether it's their social skills 101 or the ability just to deal with people. Or, I mean, I'm just saying, have a conversation to be able to sit down and say, hey, well, what's going on out there? When someone does something inappropriate. I think that is the big struggle. And I don't mean to make fun of anybody, and I just hold my phone up here. Technology is great. And one of the downfalls of technology that I've seen is the reduction maybe of social skills and communication skills because of the reliance on technology. And where we're going to see that challenge is when it comes to holding people accountable. And I'm not saying hammer people. I'm not saying discipline people, because a lot of the times when you have to hold someone accountable, hopefully they fall on the sword and they just admit what they did. And it was not that big of a deal, where it's a teachable moment in a coaching session, and that's it. And then obviously that's what progressive discipline is for, is if they continue it time and time again. But the communication skills, the conflict resolution, I think is one of the biggest things that we're struggling with, because we're either not providing the training and the people aren't coming in with the training, because it's just the world we live in today. We live in a conflict-free world. If you really look at what's going on out there, nobody likes conflict. Hey, you look great.
Or the conflict is happening on the cell phones, and it's really easy to hide behind that.
Well,
yeah.
I had a chief officer try to discipline me through text not too long ago. And I texted him back and I said, well, I'm working out at this station today. If you want to drive out here and talk to me. I thought it would get me out of it. He still drove out there and talked to me. But yeah, he was texting me on this stuff. So yeah, communication, definitely a huge part of what we're doing. So Paul, we've co-taught in one of the cool classes me and Paul did. It was a fireground class, but we actually talked about the goggle views from the strategy level, the battalion chief, the incident command level, to the captains that are at the tactical level, and the firefighters that are at the task level. And how each one of those has a different view of the incident, right? And that also each one of those has a different blind spot, if you will. So firefighters get to see what it's like on the nozzle up front at the nozzle, but they didn't get the 360 view that the captain got when they first arrived. And the captain gets the thermal imaging camera view, but he doesn't see exactly what's going on in the nozzle, and he doesn't see what's going on from the outside view that the chief officer is seeing. And taking that and applying the goggle view concept to the employee fire, I think that it's important to recognize that you as a company officer, most of the book we're tying this to company officers, is that you have to understand that you might see an employee fire one way, but the firefighter is going to see it as a different way. And the chief officer is going to, and a lot of times it might be that I'm going to get my chief officer involved, and Paul being a chief now, he can kind of step into some of this conversation here, but sometimes that they might be able to see something from the outside going, no, it's getting too hot. You need to back out, or you need help, or whatever. And so that was kind of a cool concept, because me and Paul had the fortunate thing of teaching this class, and I think there was a ton of cool concepts at it, and I kind of wrapped some of it up in the book. So turn it over to Mr. Strong here, right? So sitting in the chief officer seat, how do you view from the, I don't want to call it the 30,000 foot view, because that seems too high to me, right? As a chief officer, you need to be a little lower, but
I don't need to be that high. Yeah. Your goggle concept was brand new to me at the time, and it was great because it puts so many different things into perspective, and you can apply it in the actual strategy and tactics class that we did, or to the employee fires. I mean, you can apply it all over the place, and it's true. I mean, you've got your lenses, you got your views, depending on what rank you are, what position you're working in, what your assignment is. And your blind spots, and just as a chief officer, thinking back to going through my portion of my career, 11 years as a captain, it's a lot easier to reflect now that I've kind of gotten through that part of my career. I can look back at it all, and I can actually really, from that higher level view, let's call it the 20,000 foot view, I can really pick out the successes and the failures that I had, and plenty of failures along the way. And with the goggle view, when you're talking about the employee fires, I can recall many times when I did perceive something differently. And there's times when I kind of came in with my guns blazing, if you will, at somebody because of what I thought was going on, or intent, or whatever it might have been. And those led to some of my mistakes that really didn't help the situation out whatsoever, learning from that, thankfully, over time. And it takes practice. It takes that bad experience to learn from sometimes, but, kind of jumpstart you, if you will. But, having some successes in that area is, part of, gaining that experience, hopefully finding some classes along the way, like conflict resolution, like Steve was talking about, and some other things, which I was able to pick up a little bit over my career, but, there's just not a whole lot of options out there, really. Looking at that lens, not only from my view as a captain at the time, but also the firefighter lens that I also was looking through at one point in time. And I still have to be able to see at least a large portion of that lens, maybe not the whole thing as a captain, because I have to pay attention. And for me, looking through that firefighter lens as a captain as well means communicating. And we, Steve, you were talking about that a little bit earlier. We got to be able to communicate and develop relationships with our firefighters, get to know them, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, what motivates them, demotivates them. I mean, that's a lot of stuff, that you kind of preload, and it's like that preventative maintenance, if you will. And it really helps to quell some of those employee issues, because then when I think I'm perceiving something one way, I've already developed a relationship with Firefighter Smith, where I can probably go have that conversation a lot differently than if I hadn't had that, that relationship developed. And so the goggle view has to remain open as you're climbing the ladder in your rank and your positions. You can't just close that door behind you and just look through your view. It's got to expand, and then the blind spots are going to be what the firefighters aren't letting you see, and the blind spots are going to be what you're not aware of your supervisor, your boss's position. So you have to open those blind spots as far as you can to be as effective as you can.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of times just putting yourself in their view, right, that helps with that sympathy and empathy piece. Sometimes getting an understanding of what they see and what they're hearing and what they're doing. Or the other cool thing with conflict resolution is, you as a company officer, sometimes the conflict resolution isn't something that you and them are dealing with. You're dealing with conflict resolution between firefighter A and firefighter B, and you're somehow involved in it, right? So sometimes you're having a discussion with firefighter A, and you're trying to get them to see the view of firefighter B, and vice versa. And they might be doing something that's a little off the wall. They're not cleaning up after themselves. They're not fueling the engine, or whatever the problem is. And, there's one of the scenarios we do where the engineer keeps passing over the engine without 3/4 of a tank of fuel. And the other shift is getting all upset about it, right? As we do, we all know there's always this A shift doesn't do anything and B shift is lazy, and but we all know all three shifts don't do anything. But
We know about those B shifters.
I'm a B shifter, I get it. So, but the weird thing about it is sometimes it's the intent of the policy, right? The 3/4 of a tank of fuel, it doesn't mean you're allowed to take it down to 3/4 and then turn it over to C shift and say, haha, now you got to go get fuel. It's, hey, if you get down to 3/4, go get fuel. And if you get them to like understand, like, hey, if you were coming in every day and every shift you relieve this person, it was always at 3/4 of a tank, how would you feel? And you kind of play that put the shoe on the other foot game sometimes to kind of help with that conflict resolution. And I think that goes back to the goggle views.
Yeah. And you know, the conflict resolution between two firefighters, as in your example, as a supervisor, those were, I don't want to say easy, but they were easier for me to manage, to work through with those firefighters, because it didn't involve my own emotions. And that was one of the things that I had to learn and grow through in my career for quite some time, was emotional maturity. And, you know, when that conflict is between two other people, my emotions are not necessarily involved. And so I was able to, you know, have much better discussions and think more broadly, and be able to tap into people through conversation a lot easier. You know, where I struggled at times was when I had some sort of emotion attached to the conflict or the issue that was going on that I had to handle as a supervisor, as a captain. And then if I hadn't been trained, or I haven't had the experience in how to handle this particular situation, it would add a little bit of stress, which adds to the emotions, you know, and you really have to work through that stuff, you know, and hopefully gain some of that training and experience and learn from others. And, you know, it's a growth process.
Well, and even like you talked about the emotional intelligence piece of it and stuff like that, is not only might you be in a position where you're getting aggravated or frustrated or yelling or something like that, is you also have to know that your employee fires, sometimes they're going to attack you. They're going to attack your leadership style. They're going to attack you used to do this as a firefighter or whatever. And that makes it even more emotionally charged, because now it's not something where, well, you're just not doing what you're supposed to do, and here's the policy. They're going to kick back to, well, you do this and you're not doing this, and it becomes very difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, Steve put it really well early on, that, you know, what we do, our job is people. That's what we do, you know, and that's the most difficult part of our jobs.
Yeah.
You know, just, years ago when I was testing to become a firefighter, I remember stopping by a fire station to see a friend of mine in the Central Valley, California, and it was a one-person fire engine. I guess to this day, there's certain counties in California that still have one-person fire engines. And I remember talking to my friend who was helping me get hired in the fire department. So he was a captain, driver, firefighter, everything by himself. And I go, God, this must be very stressful by yourself out here. He goes, no, he goes, pretty easy. He goes, I don't have any personnel issues, just me, myself, and my girlfriend comes over, we have dinner, you know, and got another engine company 10 minutes that way, 15 minutes that way. I'm like, wow, no personnel issues. But yeah, it'd also be extremely boring though without the people. Thank God most of them do a great job and only require a little bit of our time correction.
Well, it's like that Bill Cosby skit he used to do where he talks about how he's got 5 kids running around or whatever. And he goes, because you know you're not a real parent if you only have 1 kid and he's yelling, "Stop touching me," then there's a problem. You know, so yeah, if there's only 1 person, I guess the conflict is a lot less. So Paul, let's talk about your case study that you submitted. And I know a secret about this case study that you submitted that people reading the book won't. So I'm sure you'll hopefully share that with us. But give us kind of a synopsis of the employee fire that you kind of threw out there in the book.
All right, be happy to. And if I don't tap into that secret, you have my permission to bring it up, no matter how embarrassing it's going to be.
All right. That's the way we build trust, is by telling other people's secrets. Well,
we probably already had this conversation, right? So my case study was, it was based on a success story, really, but that success story was truly based on all the failures previous to that. So ultimately, it was a firefighter that, you know, got got his butt handed to him throughout the shift, all night long, was on, aid car, medic, and goes like 3:30 in the morning, goes to a call to this apartment. This, middle-aged woman is in there. The apartment is unkept. It's smelly. It's stinky. It's, one of those places you need to wash your clothes after you get back, right? Because you got the cigarette smell all over you. And basically, this patient was verbally abusing both the firefighters. There's two of them, actually. But, she didn't have a true emergency going on. She had a headache situation that had been going on for a few days, and she had already been to the doctor. And, so she was basically out of her headache medication, and she was demanding that the firefighters go and get it refilled at 3:30 in the morning. And we know how that call goes. It's going to go nowhere, basically. This firefighter ultimately had enough, right? He's already tired. He's not happy to be there for this particular type of a situation when she probably could have called at 8 p.m. or 4 p.m. or whatever it was, and they were getting verbally abused. So he lost it. He blew his top a little bit, basically said some choice words to her. Thankfully, no swearing from him, but she certainly came back with an F-bomb or two and told him to get out, which he gladly did. So
that's all I wanted before you called. All I want to do is not be here.
Yeah, thank you. Now I can go back to bed. But, he thought it was over. As a captain, I'm sleeping, right? And had no idea what's going on. And so about 5 a.m, I think it was, the chief calls the captain's office. The chief's now upset with me about the situation because the chief got a call from the mayor, who happened to be friends with this patient. So that did not ultimately end very well at all. So now as the captain, I have to deal with this firefighter in that particular situation. There's obviously no way that I could, shirk my duties. Not that I would anyhow, but like there's other eyes above me, way above me, that were expecting, a process, some sort of a process to go through. So ultimately, this firefighter got woke up again, had to have a conversation with them. And the success that I had based on my past failures was in how I approached this conversation with the firefighter. Part of me, first and foremost, I could sympathize. I've been on those calls, and I know it's not easy, but we also have expectations and minimum standards that we have to meet, and we have public that we have to, make sure that we gain and maintain their trust. And they're voting citizens, right? And we know the full circle that comes with the job. But I also knew that had I approached this firefighter with a tone of voice or an accusatory kind of an approach, this person, number one, was going to shut down. It wasn't going to go anywhere. And honestly, how this person reacted was really going to dictate what steps were going to happen next, because I needed to report back up the chain, how this person handled the situation once the captain was in their face about it, right? And so ultimately, I made sure that I had good tone of voice. I actually listened more than I talked. I let them tell their side of the story, if you will. We talked about it. Didn't throw out any accusations. I told them that I understood, portions of why that, situation may have taken place. But then, of course, I have to have that conversation, the reminder conversation about what the expectations are, what the minimum expectations are, what the standards are, what the policies are, what the, even the unwritten rules about how we need to treat people, especially our citizens when we're out there on calls. And we needed to have that conversation, which is not a surprise to this person, but we needed to have the conversation to make sure we're communicating together on this stuff. So in the past, I hadn't always approached it that way. And I had mentioned it earlier, whether it was lack of training or experience, or maybe it was lack of emotional intelligence, or maybe I had that, the emotions involved with my conversation when I was communicating, and completely derailed the situation before I had a chance to get started. I pretty much dictated by my actions how the rest of that was going to go. So this particular situation worked out well. And the conversation, the reaction from that firefighter was exactly what needed to happen. And ultimately, everything worked out. But that success was based on a lot of failures in the past.
Yeah, and in the book we talk a lot about it's very difficult to manage a fire when it gets into those upper floors. If it's getting at the fire chief's office, the fire chief's desk, or the mayor, that fire is well beyond your control as a company officer at that point, where there's other people involved. And the other one that was kind of a late add to not only the class for this, but also the book, was using the CAN report to manage your employee problem. And we talk about the conditions, the actions, accountability, and needs. We do those CAN reports all the time. And this actually came from Randy Kern. He's got his book out, Taking the Heat Out of Conflict. And I kind of took some pieces out of that and kind of made it my own, like we do in the fire service. But you want that employee managing their own employee fire as much as possible. So go to that firefighter, hey, here's the conditions that I'm seeing, or here's the conditions that I'm hearing, or here's the conditions that I got from the fire chief that they got from the mayor, right? But here's the conditions. What actions are we going to take? And really, I want to have that firefighter, if at all possible, them extinguish their own fire. I don't want to have to manage your fire. I would rather you come up with the solution. Then comes the accountability piece. What SOP, policy, expectation, culture, customer service, whatever we're going to hold them to. And then what else needs to be done? Do I need to contact the fire chief and the mayor or the battalion chief? Do I need to send them to an employee assistance program, or what we commonly refer to in the book as the rapid intervention crew, people that are specially trained to save firefighters in trouble? But what else needs to be done? Maybe I need to cut paper, whatever it is, right? So I think for you, when you go back to that emotional intelligence piece, and here's the secret, right? That firefighter was who, right? Who was that firefighter? So Paul was the firefighter in question on this. And when it comes down to the emotional intelligence, probably the way that your captain actually managed that employee fire with you as that firefighter that was frustrated, upset, tired, as we all do, run on certain customers on a normal basis and things like that. How that captain actually managed your employee fire probably changed the way that you think about it when you got to that captain seat.
Absolutely. And I actually had a conversation with that captain quite some time later about our conversation. And this is after I got promoted to captain. And that was one of those things that, I felt, and I don't want to say the difference in that moment when he was talking to me, but I felt that he completely put, my fire out before it had a chance to grow. And that enabled me to engage properly and to be able to, to communicate with them appropriately, which ultimately dictated what was going to happen next, based on my reaction and my attitude about things. And so I wanted to learn from that once I became a supervisor. And so I did learn that how he handled that was based on prior failures,
Yeah. Well, and again, I think it goes back, you really start talking about that emotional intelligence piece, that if that captain would have come in and just started yelling at you, listen here, what the bleep, 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 bleep. The sad thing is when you become a captain 5 years down the road, guess what management style a lot of us end up following is what we had in the past. So now 5 years later, it becomes this repetition where you have company officers that the only way they know how to discipline or manage or work through the process is by yelling and screaming and using curse words. And yeah. As a new captain, I did the same thing. It took a while for me to learn, like, look, you can't put out every single fire by yelling. It just doesn't work. You're just feeding oxygen to it. That's all you're doing with that fire. So yeah, I appreciate you submitting that case study. And that goes back to the author's notes for your case study, right? So you teach a lot of rapid intervention crew and rapid intervention team stuff. And for those of you that don't know, Paul has a class that he does called RIT for Real. You can see it on FireX Talk. It's always one of my favorite FireX Talks out there, kind of like TED Talks for fire service stuff. But one of the things I wrote in the author's note for Paul's, right, that you do this fantastic class called RIT for Real at fire conferences that I've had the pleasure of co-teaching with you. But what's different from the RIT drill that you did versus multiple other trainings is that you actually put them in a position that instead of actually saving the firefighter in trouble, it was actually a drill set up that they were never going to save the firefighter, that they actually were going to become a victim themselves, and you put them in the position to deal with that. So when it comes down to what I wrote, where I connected to employee fires, is in the employee fire world, you must train and simulate to this extent as well. You have to be prepared to be able to save firefighters in trouble. There are incidents that might drag you into the Mayday situation until you become trapped yourself or possibly become another victim. If you have more training, you might have a better outcome. But the scary thought is that in real firefighting, all firefighters that are in trouble want to be saved from the danger. With employee fires, sometimes it feels like they don't want to be saved, or maybe they don't. We need to be prepared to assemble the RIT and be ready to go inside and do work and save people. So what do you think about that, as far as when I kind of attached your RIC stuff to the employee fire stuff, like understanding, like sometimes your people are creating their own fires, or sometimes I think they're just going around with a gas can sometimes and lighting their own, like everybody and themselves on fire, right? What's some of the stuff?
I think we all have those people in our departments. Doesn't matter where you work.
Yeah. So in your experience, have you seen some of those ones where literally you get frustrated, especially probably in the chief officer seat, where I'm just trying to help you, I'm just trying to save you, and you're just making it so much more harder on yourself?
You know, I'm going to actually kind of flip that just a little bit to where, and I love the analogy, first of all. I mean, that was perfect. You know, we have to learn how to save ourselves, you know, from ourselves, really, and put our own fires out. And the way I'm going to flip this is, instead of having that conversation, you know, with the firefighter who's already lit themselves on fire, let's flip it a little bit and preempt this so that maybe it won't happen. And that's how I've really learned how to operate in a lot of ways. Now, obviously, when there's some IDLH things going on, it doesn't always work that way. So it's situational. But you know, as a company officer, especially, developing that team is going to be really important, and that's going to really fall back on really good communication. And the company officer has to drive that communication. And when you've got people on your team that are, you know, willing to engage, and of course, that's a whole different story if somebody's not willing to engage, but they're willing to engage, that they want to be able to contribute to that team and the successes of that team. And so suddenly you're going to find yourself, you know, where the firefighters are holding each other accountable. Maybe firefighter Smith is starting to go down a road of, this isn't going to end well. And, you know, firefighter Jones has a conversation before the captain even knows about it. Or, you know, that's the kind of thing that I found for me was really helpful, is to try to preempt the stuff before it even took place. And these firefighters are learning how to put their own fires out, and they're holding each other accountable. And that's the captain's, you know, doing a lot of the times in building that team and developing good communication, you know, amongst those team members. So saving themselves from themselves, but they don't even know that they're saving themselves because it was all preempted. You know, and it kind of keeps, they start holding each other accountable, and they walk on the straight and narrow path for the most part. Now there's things that take place, but without that intervention of, you know, progressive discipline, or, you know, before it even gets to that length. That's the goal. That's the idea. And it actually has worked pretty successfully for me for many years. Doesn't always work. There's situations that it's not going to happen, you know, and you're going to have to go more hard line.
So just like when we do the Mayday training, right, we got to remember that the very first portion of that Mayday training, before we get to the point where we're going in and dragging people out, there's training on how to prevent the Mayday from occurring. And then there's training on, if you get in trouble, how to save yourself, right? And we also should be trying to prevent those employee fires. I know that some, you know, you can't teach just firefighting tactics and strategy. You have to teach fire prevention. You know, I know sometimes fire prevention is a bad word. Steve, don't tell your wife I said this. She already knows fire prevention is a bad word. But, you know, we want to teach them prevention. A lot of times when I teach this class, and I'll go to a fire department and they bring their company officers in and they say, hey, are you okay if some of the firefighters sit in on this class? Yes. And Steve, I'm sure your class is the same way.
Exactly.
Because that will help prevent some of your fires. And they see like, wow, I didn't even know the captain has to think about this stuff. And, or maybe I'll stop making some of the fires that I'm making, or maybe I could be a better smoke detector and alerting the captain of the things that I'm seeing. And so, yeah, I think that's right on, Paul. I think that preventing fires, keeping them from happening, teaching your people how to stop, drop, and roll, whatever you want to call it, I think that's huge. So yeah, that was cool. Thank you.
Yeah, and one thing that I'm sure that you guys have said and heard throughout your entire career at times, very common, is that we need to know our supervisor's job the best that we can to be better at our job. And just like we need to remember what it's like to do our current subordinate's job, right? But do we actually support that, or do we just say it, or do we support it? Do we actually bring them along for the ride, firefighters, as a captain, and show them, a peek behind the curtain, or maybe even give them some responsibilities that they can, work towards, that gives them an understanding of that position and why you have to do what you do, why you have to think the way that you think, why you have to, make decisions the way you make decisions. The more we can broaden the minds earlier in the career, the better off that person, that crew, that shift, the entire department's going to be, the community. I mean, broaden those minds early.
Well, I think it also helps with the disconnect, because there are some firefighters, because they've never walked in the shoes of their bosses, that when their bosses do have to hold them or others accountable, that the bosses sometimes get looked at in a bad light of, hey, you forgot where you came from, or what are you worrying about that for? It's not that big of a deal. And back to what Jesse said, a few years ago, we're doing our annual supervisor harassment training that every department has to do. And I remember asking our HR director, why aren't we putting the firefighters through this? And of course, the answer was, well, they're not required by law because they're not supervisors. I go, yeah, but maybe not every year, but how about we expose them to what their bosses have to do, so then they understand their bosses' jobs. They don't put their bosses in that position, and maybe they'll have a better appreciation. Plus, some of these firefighters will be future bosses, not all of them. But I think that's that disconnect sometimes, that even if someone doesn't want to be a boss, they need to understand that, no, I'm not being a jerk. I'm not micromanaging you. I'm not whatever. I'm doing this to help save you, but also help protect you, and for all these reasons that they may not be aware of. I think that's extremely critical as time goes by, explaining the why of knowing the why of what your supervisor has to do. Even as a deputy chief, those times where even I didn't recognize the job of the fire chief, because I'd never walked in those shoes until the fire chief said, no, this is what I'm seeing at my level. And, oh, thank you, boss. I didn't realize that.
That's a great example.
So,
Yeah. So just so I'm aware, to make sure I push this out right. So Chief P says that he wants all the firefighters doing the 4-hour online class of sexual harassment instead of the 2-hour.
oh, good
sure.
Lord. No. Cut that out of it. Oh, no.
Yeah, well, guys, thank you for
tarred and feathered.
Yeah, I had to take a jab in there eventually. So
oh, I know.
Oh yeah. Guys, I appreciate you hanging out with me and just kind of helping me promote the book and what you guys are doing. And Steve, I'm really looking forward to your future book. This is number 5, 4? 5,
I think. 5, yeah.
5.
5,
yeah. So pretty impressive for those of you that are involved in this club, because you're writing, keep writing. And I'll wrap it up on last minute. Anything from either one of you, whoever wants to go first?
Paul?
I'll let the big guy talk first.
Yeah, that's the guy running the podcast here, Jesse. So.
That's not me.
Well, okay, fine. So we don't drag people along longer than we have to. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Always a pleasure to hang out with both you guys. Obviously better in person, but hey, the next best thing. Fun time discussing stuff like that. I'm honored to be a part of the book there, Jesse. I appreciate the copy that you sent me. It's in my backpack. I'm on the road right now, and hopefully get a chance to read it on a plane one of these days. But obviously I saw the PDF version as you were working it up to this level. So very proud of you and happy for you. But thanks for the opportunity. And if anybody ever wants to reach out, my website, code3firetraining.com. Code3firetraining.com is my cell phone, my email address, a lot of good free stuff, resources for anybody of any rank. So hope to see you out there at some point. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you, sir. And actually, I'll throw this out there. This is actually another cool thing that I kind of talk about in the book, like having other people that you can talk with that don't know the players in the game of your fire department. And I've had a lot of people that I was able to network if I'm dealing with an employee problem and I can make phone calls. I just am lucky enough to have a network of guys like you guys. And it's one of the things that I throw out there in the book is, look, these guys are out teaching at conferences and they're doing this stuff and they were teaching at this fire department. But Steve and Paul And John Salka and Chase Sargent and all the other guys that have been involved in my book or are out on the road teaching, they just want to talk about fire.
Yeah.
They just want to talk about employee problems, just like everybody else. And you can reach out to any one of these guys, and I guarantee you they will take the time, and you can bounce stuff off of them and do that. So that's cool. Thanks, Steve.
You're welcome. Because I'm forever grateful, like you, for all the people that have helped me throughout my career, my life, that people that maybe I didn't know that well, but I was at least willing to at least start the process, the ball rolling by sending a text or a phone call, leaving a message or an email. The next thing you know, hey, you know what? I got a resource on the other end that can bounce things off of. So that's one of the benefits that we have working in this industry.
Yeah, cool. Paul, what do you got?
Well, thank you very much, Jesse. I mean, I truly appreciate you allowing me to be a part of your book. I feel very fortunate, and I know Steve does too, and all the other guys that help to contribute. And, you know, I got your book right here, and I would suggest anybody to pick a copy of this book up. Oh, is it blurred out? Let's get a little closer. I wasn't going to read it to you.
No, it's
but yeah, I would suggest to anybody
background. It's all blurred out. So
yeah, pick a copy of this book up and take a look, because it definitely puts a lot of things into perspective, and the analogies and the comparisons, and I mean everything that you write about in this book very consistently through tying what we already have drilled into our brains about strategy and tactics and everything out there on the fire ground. Let's relate it to what we do even more, which is the humanistic part of things. So thank you for allowing me to be a part of that. Steve, it's great to see you again and hanging out with both you guys. And both of you guys have been mentors to me, whether you knew it or not. I've picked up so many different things from you guys, along with, you know, all the other names that you've been throwing out there, Jesse. I mean, pay attention, listen, start conversations. I mean, these people that are out there, you know, doing these conferences and teaching and training, and you guys writing books, so many gold nuggets in there, and it's just there for the taking. Reach out and grab it. So, but thank you for allowing me to be a part of this.
No, thank you for being on board, and eventually I will sucker you into writing a book too, so you can be part of the club.
Right on.
Part of the Firefighter Book Club in a totally different sense. So
you got to get me to sit still for more than 10 minutes.
Yeah. Well, thanks, guys. I do appreciate it. We'll see you on the road teaching sooner or later.
All right.
Thank you.
Care.
Guys. All right. Have a good one, everybody.
Thank you.